No, but it will be right. The
Okay, go.
Whoever you are, we welcome you. Wherever you come from, we welcome you. Whomever you love, we welcome you. Whomever you love, we welcome you. Good morning, and welcome to our virtual broadcast here at First Unitarian Church of Toledo. We're glad to see you all online this week as every week while we take care of our community by staying home and staying distant. Brief announcement this morning. This is absolutely the last call for changes to the Toledo Unitarians directory. The new one will be published in about 2 weeks. You can contact the church office or Reverend Tim if you have a new address, phone number, email, or another update.
And I want to add to the announcements that if you have not returned your pledge forms, the deadline is already passed, but we will still take them gladly. Please return your pledge forms. I'm sure that they've fallen to the bottom of your stack, but these are what help us to determine the budget for the next year. So this is your pledge for the 2021 to 2022 church year, but please return them now so we can finish. We've had maybe 2/3 of what we expected to get back. So a third of you, please search through and get your pledge forms. Thanks very much. Now for our opening words. Let us gather an assembly together. Let us visit that creation of His. Let us send someone forth in it, just as He visited the Anoias, the regions below. And I said this thing to the whole multitude of the multitudinous assembly of the rejoicing majesty. Those were words of Jesus from the second treatise of the great Seth.
As we light the chalice today, I would like to read the words of Jesus taken from Matthew chapter 5, verses 14 through 16. And those words are these: You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine.
And please join me in reciting our covenant. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And for our congregational singing today, it's familiar to many of us in this congregation. Number 121, We'll Build a Land. We'll sing verses 1 through 3.
We'll build a land where we bind up the broken. We'll build a land where the captives go free, where the oil of gladness dissolves all mourning. Oh, we'll build a bride.
Now let's go to Soroya for story time today.
Hello, good morning. It's my honor and privilege to give the story today. It is Amelia and Her Super Magical Powers, written by Unitarian Universalist minister Gail Farr, and it's been adapted for our use today. This is the story of a young girl named Amelia. She yearned to have powers so she could help people, like the little kids who were being picked on in the schoolyard by an older girl. Ooh, superpowers would straighten her out fast, she said. And whenever she walked past the old rundown park near her house, she imagined how magic when she saw Karen bullying two younger kids by the swings. She'd read what to do about bullies, but she never tried any of it before because she wasn't really sure she could do it. But now, with her superpowers, she was ready. Come on, Amelia said to those, go help those kids. So she walked up to where Karen stood over the two children, and Amelia wiggled her fingers at her and said loudly, Karen, stop it right now. Come on, Dodie and Lou, come with me. You're safe now. Amelia told the two, if she bothers you again, just turn around and walk away. Act like you don't hear her. Don't show any emotion. And if she keeps on trying to hurt you, let Mr. Crenshaw in the office know. I'll go with you if you need me to. They did just as Amelia said, and Karen never bothered those kids again. Well, by now, Amelia was feeling pretty good about her super magic powers. How can I use them to fix up our old park? She wondered. She took trash bags to the park and started picking up trash that had been left there. Before long, a couple of friends came by and asked what she was doing. I'm fixing our park so we can play in it again. That sounded like a great idea to her friends, and they began to help. Soon, other kids joined them. They picked up trash, pulled weeds, and cleared out dead brush. Little by little, the park began to look better. It was hard work, and it took many days, but they got their new park. When it was all done, the whole neighborhood had a picnic in their new park to celebrate it. After the picnic, Amelia fell exhausted into bed. She was just about sleep when the fairy godmother came back. Oh, I'm so happy to see you, said Amelia. I want to thank you for giving me all those super magic powers. But I tried to tell you I didn't have a special wand, so I had to use my hands. I didn't give you any, said the fairy godmother. The fairy godmother smiled. My dear, you did those things because you possess three powers that you developed yourself: kindness, bravery, and determination. With those three things, you are making a difference. Change is always in your hands. And with that, Amelia fell fast asleep.
Now, I want to interject before we go to the anthem that we have a lot of thunder going on right now. I don't know if you can hear it on our feed, but apparently some of our technology might be going in and out. So just be prepared. We're going to keep with the service. And if it goes out, it comes back up. And you will have missed only things that were utterly important that you'll never retrieve again. So please stay tuned. Now it's anthem time. This is Just Such a Time as This, written by Amanda Udis Kessler and sung by Mickey Imch with Bonnie Rowe on piano.
Filled with fear, laden with sadness, chaos and madness grow around us. Still we're here, risking and daring, endlessly caring. Hope has found us. Peace around us. We are called for just such a time as this. For this time we were made. We give all our love and compassion, trust into action, even afraid. We were called for just such a time as this, and we make this vow. We'll bring all our gifts to the table, do what we're able somehow. For we were called for just such a time as now. Touched by grief, stressed and exhausted, counting the losses, sorrow haunts us still again. We are invited, gently reminded, faith has found us. Grace astounds us. We were called for just such a time as this. For this time we were made. We give all our love and compassion, trust into action, even afraid. We were called for just such a time as this. We will make this vow. We'll bring all our gifts to the table, do what we're able somehow. For we were called for just such a time as now. We were called for just such a time as now.
Now, please join me for a time of meditation, contemplation, and prayer. This past week was the Hindu Festival of Lights, Diwali. This past week, finally, it seems, although it's not really an overlong amount of time, the presidential election was definitely decided in terms of electoral votes. The Electoral College meets in mid-December, but for now, we do know that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were elected president and vice president. And yes, there is some unrest about that, but this is what the voters have said. We also as always, think of our own events of joy and sorrows, gladness and sadness. We think of life and death, of the closeness of people and animals that are close to us. And we think of the state of the world and hope that the beloved community can come to be, that the world does get better. For our words of meditation, I have some sayings of Jesus. And when you pray, you shall not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the corners of the streets, that they may be seen by men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. But you, when you pray, go into your room, and when you have shut your door, pray to your Father who is in the secret place, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. Also, words of Jesus, and when you pray, do not use vain repetitions as the heathen do, for they think that they will be heard for their many words. Therefore, do not be like them, for your Father knows the things you have need of before you ask him. In words of Jesus, therefore, I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. And whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, to that your Father also, who is in heaven, may forgive you your trespasses. And this prayer from Jesus, when you pray, say, Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us day by day our daily bread. And forgive us our sins, for we also forgive everyone who is indebted to us. And do not lead us into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Let's observe 1 minute of silence.
we hear these words from the Apocryphon of James, chapter 8, verses 11 through 28. The words of Jesus. Become earnest about the word. For as to the word, its first part is faith, the second, love, the third, works. For from these comes life. For the word is like a grain of wheat. When someone had sown it, he had faith in it. And when it had sprouted, he loved it because he had seen many grains in place of one. And when he had worked, he was saved because he had prepared it for food. And again, he left some to sow. So also can you yourselves receive the kingdom of heaven unless you receive this through knowledge. You will not be able to find it.
Pay the emperor what belongs to the emperor, and God what belongs to God. That sentence is the most reliable quotation of Jesus that scholars today have traced, as it's in the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas. What does it mean? Well, you don't give everything to the government, and you don't give everything to the church. Or if you live in an occupied land, don't resist in a way that might bring the force of the empire down upon you. Or that both state and church need your support, with one not being part of the other. Or books have been written on this, so just because Jesus said it doesn't make it clear. He did, after all, teach in parable. Many parables, though, aren't traced directly to Jesus, according to a group that was formed to try to determine what Jesus actually said. That's the Jesus Seminar. And in the 2016 book, Christ for Unitarian Universalists, a new dialogue with traditional Christianity, author Scotty McLennan, a Unitarian Universalist minister, described the Jesus Seminar's work this way. It started in 1985 with 30 biblical scholars and later expanded to hundreds. They examined all four Gospels in the New Testament and debated the degree of authenticity of Jesus' words. That is, they distinguished what Jesus likely said himself from what was likely the later creation of the Gospel writers and the early Christian community. In the process, they determined that in the Gospel of John, there is not a single saying that can with certainty be traced back to the historical Jesus. And they found that 82% of the words ascribed to Jesus in the other three Gospels were not actually spoken by him. So, on one level, it seems that we cannot know very much about the historical Jesus from the Bible. Jesus Saith is another of my series of Jesus sermons, which I started at the beginning of this year to look at this religious leader from my perspective as a humanist. In January, I gave Jesus' introduction, then the arrest and execution of Jesus in February, Friday noon to Sunday dawn, Jesus' death in March, the born again Jesus on Easter Sunday last April, and young Jesus in May. There are more angles of the Jesus story, so now, 6 months later, I'm picking up this series on Jesus with Jesus Saith, which gets to Jesus' words and teaching. I took the picture of a page of the Bible Concordance that tracks the word saith. A concordance, a concordance is a record of every word in a book or other document. And here, starting here, there are many entries in red indicating that they're the words of Jesus. I'll say more in a minute about the red letters, but the point of this Jesus saith sermon is that there's a lot attributed to Jesus that he might not have said, and very little way to know which words actually were those of Jesus rather than individuals or groups that want to cover their issues with some kind of divine order. But we also ask, does that matter? The Jesus Seminars book on this from 1993 is The Five Gospels, The Search for the Authentic Words of Jesus. It includes a new translation of the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Thomas, one of the Gnostic Gospels, called the Scholars Version, and details on how the 74 members of the Jesus Seminar for that book, which includes one Unitarian Universalist minister I could identify, Davidson Lohr, determined a degree of authenticity for the instances in those Gospels of Jesus saith. Each scholar got to vote, and they had different colors of beads to vote. And then, kind of like grading, they determined averages from the results. A red bead indicated two things about a passage. I would include this item unequivocally in the database for determining who Jesus was, and Jesus undoubtedly said this or something very like this. Remember that John's gospel got no red beads. The only entry in all four of the other books that was read was, pay the emperor what belongs to the emperor, and God what belongs to God. Jesus's turn the other cheek reaction from Matthew and Luke was voted as authentic. The Scholars Version translation from Luke is, when someone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other as well. When someone takes away your coat, don't prevent that person from taking your shirt along with it. Give to everyone who begs from you. Also from Matthew and Luke is the phrase, love your enemies, and only the term Father from what came to be called the Lord's Prayer. And this simile, for which I'll give the Matthew translation from the Scholars Version. Heaven's imperial rule is like leaven, which a woman took and concealed in 50 pounds of flour until it was all leavened. Let me take a moment to talk about translation and quoting this man for whom our calendars were reset. In religion scholar Bart D. Ehrman's book from 2016, Jesus Before the Gospels, the author makes the point that it is crucial to remember that those who were involved with Jesus in his ministry were lower class Aramaic speaking Jews in rural Palestine. They were not literate, they were not educated, they were poor. They did not have the time, money, inclination, or wherewithal to travel around the world. Jesus never left Palestine. He spent almost his entire life in Galilee before making a trip to Jerusalem in the last week of his life. The same can almost certainly be said about virtually all of his followers, and about those who saw and heard from him during his public ministry. The gospel writers, on the other hand, lived in other parts of the world, probably major cities scattered throughout the empire. Their language was Greek, not Aramaic. They never indicate that they interviewed eyewitnesses. They almost certainly did not go to Palestine to make inquiries among the people who knew Jesus during his lifetime, for example, through interpreters. They inherited the stories they heard in Greek. Those stories had been in circulation for years and decades before they themselves heard them. There had been stories, of course, during Jesus' lifetime, tales of his activities, sayings, and death. These would have been told in Aramaic in Palestine. Some of those stories came to be translated into Greek and circulated in Christian communities in that form. Other stories were almost certainly constructed originally in Greek. The unknown authors of these Gospels may well have been raised on these stories as Christians from their youth, or possibly they converted as adults and heard the stories as recent converts. When they wrote their accounts, they obviously put their own spin on stories. But the vast majority of the stories themselves had been circulated by word of mouth for 40 or 50 years or more before these authors put them together into their extended narratives. Records don't exist. If Jesus were some type of resident business person, we might get a merchant's manifest, like how it was discovered writing came to be. We don't know if there could be something deep in the archives of the Vatican, but that's doubtful because of time and occasional unrest, and a habit, it seems, of using old files for other purposes long, long ago, like as heating fuel. And the records of Palestine wouldn't seem important to the resident Roman imperials. So we get to the 21st century, and still there is speculation on what Jesus saith. I'll tell you the other red entries as determined by the Jesus Seminar, that there's good probability they're authentic words, but they've been translated from Aramaic and or Greek. From Luke, these Beatitudes, a very small part of the Sermon on the Mount. Congratulations, you poor, God's domain belongs to you. Congratulations, you hungry, you will have a feast. Congratulations, you who weep now, you will laugh. Thomas also had the first beatitude. Congratulations to the poor, for to you belongs heaven's domain. There's one parable for Matthew, for heaven's imperial rule is like a proprietor who went out the first thing in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the workers for a silver coin a day, he sent them into his vineyard. That's the parable in which workers are hired throughout the day, and then when work ends, they're all paid the same amount. And there are two Luke parables that the Jesus Seminar saw as authentic. One is the story of the Good Samaritan. The other is commerce related, about a dishonest manager who negotiates with his boss's debtors in order to try to save his job. Others tried to add words to Jesus' parables to try to explain them. And there's only one other quotation from the Jesus Seminar that they expressed confidence in being said by Jesus, from the Gospel of Thomas. It's like a mustard seed. It's the smallest of all seeds, but when it falls on prepared soil, it produces a large plant and becomes a shelter for birds of the sky. There's one other thing from the Jesus Seminar book that I want to bring to you. In telling how they were determining authenticity, they stated, the final test is to ask whether the Jesus we have found is the Jesus we wanted to find. Beware of finding a Jesus entirely congenial to you. That gets to the quotation on the cover of the Order of Service, which is by Andrew Marin, and I got it from the website redletterchristians.org. He wrote, My understanding of Scripture tells me that those red letters in the Bible are the baseline framework of the countercultural principles from our Savior that change and transform not only our own lives, outlook, and engagement with the church, culture, and politics, but also our communities, cities, and countries. Red Letter Christians is an organization founded in 2007 by Tony Campolo and Shane Claiborne, both evangelicals, but very different in the way they live their Christianity, but who both follow the guidance of the red letters in the Bible, the words of Jesus, especially his preaching in the Sermon on the Mount. They're not restricted to the red letters from the Jesus Seminar's Scholars Version, but to Jesus saith, without too much restriction on how it came to be in red letters. By calling ourselves Red Letter Christians, the About entry on redletterchristians.org says, we assert that we are committed first and foremost to doing what Jesus said. Jesus calls us away from the consumerist values that dominate contemporary America. Instead, he calls us to meet the needs of the poor. He also calls us to be merciful, which has strong implications in terms of war and capital punishment. After all, when Jesus tells us to love our enemies, he probably means we shouldn't kill them. Red letter editions are actually fairly recent, coming from about 120 years ago. A publisher had the idea that since Jesus speaks of his blood poured out for you, the words of Jesus in a Bible could be read to carry that symbolism. And it would also help because most Bibles of the time didn't use quotation marks, so this would show the quotes. The Jesus Seminar book gives attribution to that publisher, Louis Klopsch of the Christian Herald, and it says that the red letters differ according to different Bibles, like if it's just the words of Jesus spoken on earth, or also includes in red Jesus quotes from visions and after what's described as the resurrection. But the Jesus Seminar book also notes there was previous use of color for word illustration, including a 14th century manuscript with crimson words of Jesus, his genealogy, and of angels. When we get to Jesus saith, there is, as you've heard, much leeway as to what Jesus actually did say. For much more than the Jesus Seminar red letter entries, you might turn to the book The Complete Jesus from 1997, a compilation of sayings and teachings attributed to Jesus from the New Testament, Christian Gnostic writings, and New Testament Apocrypha. This work is, the author, Ricky Alamayot writes, the most complete collection of sayings attributed to Jesus in a single volume. The purpose of this book, he continues, is not to establish whether the living Jesus actually uttered all or only some of the teachings collected here, a subject of immense scholarly controversy, but rather to help us approach more closely what Jesus may have actually taught. Since Jesus himself left no written statement, we must rely on the accounts and traditions of those who recorded his words and actions. Whether Jesus actually said the words is not of crucial importance to most Unitarian Universalists. We can follow the teachings without having to rely on perfect attribution. And we look everywhere for inspiration. It doesn't matter who said it if it rings true, with the exception of plagiarism, for we do want honesty. Whether Jesus said it or Brian Cohen, in the Monty Python movie Life of Brian, Brian was the next door neighbor born on the same day as Jesus, and people mistake him for the Messiah. It's the guidance, not who guides, So always look on the bright side of life can be scripture for us, while it might be controversial to some Christians. When you hear or read Jesus said, consider the context. Remember that in the about 3 years of his public ministry, Jesus was something of a nomad with a close group of followers, and he would speak and teach and advocate for religious revolution and resolution as a different way to be in community rather than in the hierarchy of the systems in Palestinian government and religious leadership 2,000 years ago. He was talking some about the kingdom of heaven and how to prepare for the end of the world, while also trying to say that oppressed people are important and we need to love one another. Scotty McLennan, the author of Christ for Unitarian Universalists, wrote, I have not spoken of Jesus Christ as the supernatural or as the bloody atoner for the sins of humankind or as the one and only way to spiritual truth. I believe we can read the New Testament and 2,000 years of Christian experience as testifying to embodied values of rationality, equality, tolerance, freedom, and respect. Through Jesus Christ, we can come to see clearly the inherent worth and dignity of every person, the role of justice and compassion in human relations, the goal of world community, and many other values affirmed by our Unitarian Universalist faith. Through Jesus Christ, we can come to direct experience of transcending mystery and wonder, openness to the forces that create and uphold life, love for God and neighbor, and much more that enriches and ennobles our faith. We Unitarian Universalists like to say it's the teachings of Jesus that are important and not focus much on whether there is greater divinity for Jesus than there is for any other person. So when it gets to Jesus saith, don't get involved in the details. Don't look for the exact quote. And remember that the second source of Unitarian Universalism, which our congregation's covenant to affirm and promote, is words and deeds of prophetic people, which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. That is what the stories of Jesus give us, regardless of how it was said or if it was actually Jesus who was the speaker. And think of our fourth source, Jewish and Christian teachings, which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves. Some of us don't believe in God, but we know from reading and hearing what God's love is. Living the concept of that love doesn't require belief any more than knowing what it was that Jesus actually said, as opposed to what's attributed to him. Remember our reading before the sermon that the word is faith, love, and works. And be earnest that way in our inclusive Unitarian Universalism. So be it.
We've now come to our time for offertory. As you tune in from a variety of places on this rainy morning, I invite you to reflect on the role this community plays in your life. What does church mean to you? Through this 2020 storm, your support is critical to sustaining this place of solace for so many. We look forward to the days when we'll be back together, safely singing and sharing potlucks and getting hugs, maybe from Miss Ellie. Hi. We thank those of you that have pledged and remind y'all that we have only received 2/3 of our anticipated pledges. Please send those in or contact our church office if you need more information. If you're so moved, please write in to our Glendale address or click on the link below to participate in our virtual passing of the plate. We do have annual pledge information at that link as well. So you can find us here at Glendale or at uutoledo.org. We look forward to seeing y'all soon.
And now, coming soon. Next week's 10 a.m. Spiritual Adventures Forum is scheduled to be Gratitude at Thanksgiving, led by Teree Lane. And our service next week at 11 a.m. has the long title, A Service in Commemoration. Let me get back to it. Where do we have it? I'm looking at my slides and not clicking them. It's a service in commemoration of the quarter-centenary of the landing of the Pilgrim Fathers. You might just call it Pilgrims in Perspective. But that long title is based on a service that First Unitarian Church of Toledo did 100 years ago. And we're going to pick on that and give a little bit more context about how we've developed our view of the Pilgrim's Landing and our relationship with Native Americans in the last 100 years.
Immediately after today's service, we'll have our Zoom social hour. This is taking the place of our in-person coffee hour, so you're welcome to fill up your coffee or tea and come on and say hello. Special invitation extended to our visitors on the YouTube channel. Our Zoom meeting code and password are available in the FYI, in the Facebook, or on the page up at the end of service up on the screen. We look forward to seeing y'all there.
Now for our closing words, more words of Jesus. I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple, where all Jews come together. I have said nothing secretly.
And we're going to send the flame out today with once again the words of Jesus, taken from Matthew chapter 10, verse 27. Whatever I tell you in the dark, speak in the light, and what you hear in the ear, preach on the housetops.